Just when many high-end users thought that Apple was out of the Pro PC market for good, they surprised everyone with their announcement of the iMac Pro. The internals are way ahead of their time, with an up to 18-core Xeon CPU, AMD's latest and most powerful graphics card, 128GB of error-correcting RAM, and 4TB of the fastest storage on the market. If you really think about it, that's a ludicrous amount of power to be crammed into a thin all-in-one machine, not to mention trying to keep the system cool with such limited space. So who is all of this power for, and is there really a market for a machine that starts at a base price of $4,999 and can be spec'd out to a grand total of $13,200? Well, Apple seems to think so, and I would have to agree. I come from a video production background, and a lot of the freelancers and production studios that I network with are choosing to buy iMacs over Mac Pros, and many of them prefer to buy a machine and use it for 3 to 5 years until they feel like it's time to buy a new one. They want something that's quick and easy to set up, that performs well, is reliable, and is backed by a solid company and warranty. That typically has been an iMac, but for those who have been craving some more power, that something is now the iMac Pro. Apple wanted to make sure you knew an iMac Pro when you saw one, and with the new space gray finish, there's no doubt you will. Everything in the box is also space gray or black, including the Apple stickers. The display is the same 5K Retina display from the previous top-tier iMac. It's stunningly sharp with gorgeous colors and admittedly still way ahead of its time. The speakers have been upgraded, as well as the FaceTime camera, which is now 1080p instead of 720p on previous Macs. You also get 4 microphones now. To see and hear the difference in the speaker and FaceTime quality, click the card above. The SD card reader now supports UHS 2 cards for transfer speeds up to 3 times faster, and for the first time ever in any Mac, we have 10 gigabit Ethernet networking, which is great for anyone working with media on servers. The iMac Pro has 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, which can support up to 2 5K displays or 4 4K displays. For our review, we're testing the base model iMac Pro. There's a $1,300 price hike from a high-end 2017 5K iMac with similar RAM and SSD capacity. For the money, we get workstation-grade components, double the Thunderbolt 3 ports, 10 gigabit Ethernet, and various other improvements. Like we mentioned, you could spec the machine up to $13,200, but we believe most users will spend below $8,000. With all of this power, Apple has completely redesigned the cooling system to handle these high-end components. Gone is the access to the RAM on the iMac Pro, and many are disappointed. I personally don't think that this decision was to force you to buy more RAM up front at high prices, but to ensure the best cooling possible inside of the machine, since an access door with the necessary radio frequency shielding would have altered airflow. A breakdown of the iMac Pro by Mac sales shows the SSD, RAM, and CPU are socketed, meaning they could be upgraded down the line, but that would require ungluing the display from the chassis. In our benchmarks and tests, we'll be putting it against the fastest regular iMac available. Taking a look at Geekbench 4, our 8-core Xeon scored 5,088 points for single-core. That's pretty impressive, since Xeons are usually much slower at simple tasks. The 5K iMac scored the highest single-core score in any Mac. For multi-core, however, the iMac Pro destroyed the 5K iMac with a 61% faster score. Comparing it against the 8-core 2013 Mac Pro shows just how much progress has been made in 4 years. Looking at Geekbench 4's GPU compute performance, the iMac Pro scored 35% higher in the OpenCL test and an impressive 40% higher using Apple's Metal. Running Cinebench R15, the iMac Pro scored 81% higher than the 5K iMac. We set the test to use only one core, and the iMac Pro was impressively close to the higher clocked 5K iMac. We ran the old but popular Unigine Heaven benchmark using the extreme setting, which does a good job of translating benchmark performance to gaming performance. The iMac Pro scored a 76% higher score than the 5K iMac, which we did test for gaming. The machine was able to play most modern titles at a resolution of 1440p, so it's looking pretty promising for the iMac Pro. We'll be looking a bit closer at gaming performance in a future video, so be sure and subscribe if you don't want to miss it. For the remainder of this review, we'll be focusing on performance of professional applications that this machine is designed to be used with. We tested the recently updated Photoshop as well as Lightroom Classic, where we imported and exported 50 42MP RAW A7R3 files and saw almost no difference. Exporting them to JPEG and applying things like filters and noise reduction, we ended up with a maximum average speed increase for difficult tasks of around 30%, but for regular editing there wasn't much of a difference. If you want to see much more details on these tests or any other tests we ran, check out our full review article by clicking the card above or using the link in the video description. Full-time professional photo editors could make use of the extra power, but if you don't edit a lot of high-resolution images, the very capable 5K iMac with its i7 processor is likely the better choice for photo editing. We tested rendering performance in After Effects with a benchmark sequence by EqualLoud that's available to download on his Vimeo page. The iMac Pro took 5 minutes and 8 seconds compared to 7 minutes and 7 seconds on the standard iMac 5K. Testing BruceX in Final Cut, the iMac Pro was just slightly faster than the iMac 5K, but it used fewer system resources. Stabilizing a 20-second 4K clip was actually faster on the regular iMac, which used the full graphics card performance compared to just 40% on the iMac Pro. Exporting a 5-minute H.264 1080p project with 2 LUTs and film grain applied, the standard iMac was 25% faster, and in the same test but in 4K, the iMac was 28% faster. To finish off, we ran our toughest project, which puts the maximum strain on the CPU and GPU, and once again our regular iMac was faster. The results seem shocking, but there are 2 reasons why this is happening. The regular iMac is constantly maxing out its CPU and graphics to reach these great levels of performance, where the iMac Pro is usually only using about half or less of its resources. On top of that, the iMac 5K speeds up the H.264 renders using QuickSync that's included in its integrated graphics. Since none of the Xeon chips in the iMac Pro feature this, actual encoding is slower. We tested a very tough 34-minute 4K project with lots of effects and exported to a super high quality ProRes file. In this scenario, the iMac Pro was faster, but the difference wasn't huge, since fewer system resources are being used. We ran similar tests as with Final Cut using DaVinci Resolve, and the results were very close between the 2 machines. Stabilizing a 4K clip was faster with the iMac 5K since the program relies more on clock speed. Our 1080p and 4K renders were both slightly faster with the iMac 5K, and even in our very difficult 4x4K project with heavy effects, the iMac Pro was slower. The new iMac Pro has the raw performance, but these programs are just not utilizing it to the maximum extent possible. Premiere Pro is where we first start to see some actual improvements. We saw an increase of about 35% in our 1080p and 4K test projects with the iMac Pro, and in the 4x4K heavy test, the iMac Pro was almost twice as fast. If you're doing heavy work in Premiere Pro, this machine is starting to make sense. High-end cameras that shoot RAW have been coming down in cost, and with the latest Intel Xeon and the iMac Pro, we finally have the power to edit the footage and apply filters in real time. Editing 4K 60 frames per second Canon RAW from the new but popular Canon C200 was a possibility using the iMac Pro with Final Cut at full resolution, even with effects, and in DaVinci Resolve without effects. Adding footage corrections in Resolve required us to drop to 1/2 resolution, which still looked great. The iMac 5K couldn't handle this task on either editing platform unless we dropped the resolution to levels too low for a good editing experience. Exporting a 5-minute color-graded 4K 60 project with the iMac Pro showed some respectable improvements over the iMac 5K. We couldn't test Premiere Pro as it does not yet support Canon RAW files. We also tested Red's 4.5 and 8K RAW footage at 24 frames per second and were surprised by how well the base model iMac Pro handled it. In DaVinci Resolve, we could only work and export in a 4K timeline since we didn't have the studio version, but we could edit 8K RAW with a 1/4 debayer, which still looks great on the 5K display, whereas the standard iMac 5K was essentially unusable. The same goes for Final Cut and Premiere, where we edited and exported in an 8K timeline and played back at roughly 1/4 resolution, which looked quite smooth and good even with effects, whereas the standard iMac 5K just choked. When testing Red's Raven 4.5K RAW, the iMac Pro cut through it with ease, while the iMac 5K fared better here than the 8K, but overall the experience is still subpar. Taking a look at a 5-minute 8K project render to ProRes, the speed difference between the 2 machines is shocking, and we finally see the Pro performance come out of the iMac Pro. To finish off the test, we rendered the model village scene from SolidWorks using the Maya Arnold render engine, where the iMac Pro was almost twice as fast as the regular iMac. Since Arnold rendering scales almost perfectly with larger projects, Maya users should enjoy very good performance increases. Let's talk about fan speeds and temps. For such a powerful system, it's impressive just how quiet the iMac Pro is. Throughout most of these tests, the iMac Pro was virtually silent, where a regular 5K iMac ran at full fan speeds. Unfortunately, for most tasks, we did see short dips in the maximum boost clock speed since Apple is choosing to run the system hotter but quieter. We think this is okay for a consumer machine, but for a pro machine we prefer it to stay cool. There are currently no fan controller apps that support the new Mac, so right now users can't tailor the speeds to their liking. To see a detailed video on the iMac Pro thermals, click the card above. Overall, the iMac Pro really is a pro machine stuffed into a beautiful shell, made it to one of the best displays on the market. With the base price coming in at $1,300 more than a similar iMac, this will be a computer that makes sense for a lot of pros that do high-end work. But if you're a photographer that doesn't regularly go through thousands of high-resolution RAW files, or a videographer who edits H.264, a high-end regular iMac is likely the better choice. If you enjoyed this video, like it and hit that subscribe button. Also, check out our price guide, which makes it extremely easy to find the best deals on Apple products, updated daily. Be sure to follow us on social media, and we'll see you in the next video.